Hello everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Daniel Korchnoi. I'm currently living in Northumberland, and today I want to do another chess book review. So today I'm going to review the book about Victor Korchnoi, and it's year by year, so it's the first volume of his life, 1945-1968. By the way, I don't think 1945 was the year in which Victor Korchnoi was born. I think he was born earlier than that. But he did grow up during the Second World War, as it mentions in the book. So it talks about his early life in this book. Now, Victor Korchnoi, obviously some people might look at this book and think, you know, why would I bother to buy this book? If you're one of the younger generation growing up with people like Nakamura, why do I care about this old guy who's no longer with us? And you know, it's like from a different generation. Well, I think this book really explains, you know, why he was interesting, why players of that era were interesting. I was lucky enough actually to play against Boris Spassky in France, early 2000s. That game was a draw. I was lucky enough to play blitz chess against David Bronstein. I lost 5-1. I was already quite a good player by that point. I must have been in my sort of like, it was probably about 17 at that point. David would have been in his 60s. Obviously he passed away as well. Most of the players from that era are no longer with us. Korchnoi, the only time I ever saw Korchnoi play was 1994, I believe. It was after Lloyd's Bank Masters. The final Lloyd's Bank Masters was won by Alexander Morozevich, which was about 10 out of a crazy score, like 10 out of 11 or something, you know. Like, he was an unknown. He came to England and everyone's saying like, this guy's like the next world champion, right? He played against Korchnoi in something like the last 16 or the quarterfinals. Korchnoi, I'll always remember that match because I thought, you know, this Morozevich is going to win easily. He's playing this old guy, you know, Korchnoi, and he's just going to crush him. You know, he's just won Lloyd's Bank. This is just going to be a piece. I was watching the audience, right? Well, Korchnoi took him to the cleaners, and I always had respect for Korchnoi after that. I was thinking, this guy is just such a fighter. You know, he's got somebody, he uses experience very well. I always think experience is like an overrated concept, but Korchnoi, as comes through in this book, thought very deeply about his experiences as a chess player, and he used them in a productive way. And I think that's one of the ways that he set himself apart, because, you know, this volume covers the early part of his career. It's quite a long book. I would say it's quite a heavy book. You know, it takes a lot of reading. It's probably going to take you like maybe a couple of weeks, maybe a month to read through, unless you really devote yourself to it. Full of a huge amount of chess. The authors are Hans Rennet. I don't know if he's related to Hans Reh. I've met Hans Reh. Hans Rennet, I don't know, it's no relation probably. Tibor Karolyi is quite a famous grandmaster, I believe, from Hungary. Quite a famous writer as well. And yeah, so really it goes through that early part of Korchnoi's career, which again is fascinating. In a way, I think Korchnoi is overshadowed in some respects by some of his contemporaries. So, you know, would have been players like obviously Mikhail Tal. Mikhail Botvinnik was a little bit earlier, but if we talk about players from the same generation, we're talking about people like Tal, Spassky, who both became world champion. Before Korchnoi was really known as this phenomenal player, those guys had already achieved title world champion. Obviously, you know, Korchnoi was a phenomenal player in the 1960s, but he probably became more famous in the 1970s due to his matches with Karpov. That also inspired a younger generation, because I remember reading that Vishy Anand spent some of his childhood in the Philippines, and he actually went to the match, where the match had taken place several months after it had taken place. That would have been 1978. So yeah, so Korchnoi at that time, obviously 1978 would have defected. Doesn't cover that period in the book, but what he does cover is the earlier period, I think it was overshadowed to some degree, and it does. Where the book really comes alive for me is probably in the middle part of the book, where it starts talking about, these sort of like tournaments like Caraco, which is in the Caribbean. That was like a Dutch island, where they had this very famous tournament in 1962, where Fischer alleged that there was this sort of Soviet kind of like, that they were all sort of like conspiring against him, but Korchnoi was left out of that because Korchnoi was not really involved in this kind of match fixing. That went against his kind of personality, that he was like a fighter, rather than a fixer. He's not, he's not a fighter. He's not a fixer. He's a fighter. So yeah, so I think it really comes alive. And then when he talks about people like Bobby Fischer, about his famous work ethic, talks about some of the things that they got up to, like Fischer was complaining about how they would sort of like go by the pool, and they'd sort of like come in and play the game and then go back to the pool. Some of the players and all that kind of stuff. It really comes alive because then you got really the personalities behind that, and you kind of feel a little bit sad because you feel like stuff like that just doesn't happen anymore. Like these kind of personalities like Korchnoi, Tao, you don't get them nowadays in modern chess. Fischer, Timon, Garry Kasparov, Karpov, Geller, Botvinnik. There's all these boring people who drink orange juice and just spend 8 hours a day studying chess plays. They've got no personalities. Korchnoi had a great personality. I spoke to Joe Gallagher because Korchnoi famously defected from the Soviet Union to the West. That caused a lot of problems for him, and he ended up in Switzerland, and he played for the Swiss national team in a later part of his life. And Korchnoi had a bit of a spiky personality. That's obviously explained in the book, that he wasn't necessarily the nicest guy in the world, but obviously it all depends on your experience with him. Some people had a great experience with him, some people less so. But I remember Joe Gallagher telling me that Korchnoi would come up to him during these Olympiads, during these team events, and he would explain to Joe what insult he's going to say to his opponent after the game, which is in my view is very, very funny. Just the fact that he's doing that is hilarious. So he was quite a funny guy as well as having this kind of very powerful personality, I would say. Actually, Korchnoi is one of these people who wasn't actually over 2700. So at some point in the book, he talks about this match with Tao, and he says after he beats Tao, because he had a great record against Tao, that was interesting as well. Why did he have a great record against Tao? Partly because he won early on in their career. I think that's what he explains in the book, but also because he was like a materialist, Korchnoi, which is a fascinating, not many chess players are, I think. Most people just like to sacrifice, attack, but Korchnoi was a great strategical player. He was a great positional player. He loved space. He loved material. So he was quite a cynical player. So he would grab a pawn. And I think he saw through a lot of Tao's concepts. I think he thought Tao was quite a simple player. But he mentions that Tao, when he beat Tao, he thought that Spassky, his next opponent, was a stronger player. But actually, if you look at their peak ratings, Tao was actually higher than Korchnoi and Spassky. Both Korchnoi and Spassky never got over 2700. Although Korchnoi, I think, did get very close. I think he was 2690 peak. Now, I think if he'd have been playing in the 1990s or 2000s, where he had a lot of inflation, he probably would have gotten over 2700. But yeah, it's a fascinating book in a way. It's done over 4 volumes, I think, this book. So the first volume covers obviously 1945 and 1968. Second volume, I think, might cover some of the early matches with Karpov. Third volume, again, maybe some of the later matches with Karpov, and also obviously had the candidates match against Kasparov as well. And then obviously the final volume would probably be talking about the final part of his career. I mean, I think personally 3 volumes would have been enough, but I think it's 4 volumes. But I would recommend buying all of them because I think it's a really interesting period of chess history. It's quite a heavy book, I would say. I wouldn't say it's perfect. No chess book is. It takes a lot of getting through, but the chess annotations are really good. You know, they're on a proper level, and it's just a really interesting book. I must admit that the Korchnoi was one of the first chess books I've ever read, because it was like a volume of Korchnoi's games. So that's why I'm familiar with some of the games in the book. It's like his famous game where Korchnoi sacrifices queen for 2 bishops, which is really, like, it made an incredible impression on me at the time. So I got this book for some sort of prize that I got for playing in a I can't remember. It was some sort of tournament in the old London Chess Centre, which was in Clapham Junction. I used to go there when I was a kid, and they had like a Saturday rapid play like once a month or something like that. And it was above the old Mecca Bingo Hall. And if anyone remembers that, leave your comments down below. Near Clapham Junction. It's where I first played against Luke McShane and other good players. Luke McShane was even younger than I was. I think I played him when he was 6 and I was 12. And I beat him in the King's Indian. But it started going downhill after that. So I was probably inspired by people like Korchnoi, who I also, I think, played the King's Indian. No, actually, sorry, he had a very low opinion of the King's Indian. Possibly played it himself, but I think he generally had a low opinion of the King's Indian. He felt like he just gave white too big a space advantage. Said he's fascinating clashes with Kasparov later in his career, because Kasparov was a great advocate of the King's Indian. But he was kind of proven right in a way, because computers now regard the King's Indian as being quite a poor opening. You know, they give white quite a big advantage. So Korchnoi loves space advantages. So that's another thing you can get from his games. So yeah, I'd recommend this book. I think it's a really good book. It's by Elk and Ruby, who are an up-and-coming publisher. Please buy this book to support that publishing company. There's also some other books on the back. There's a chess biography of Rudolf Spielmann, who was a famous German player, possibly from way back in the day. A chess biography of Winower. The chess art of somebody or other, I can't even read and make it out, of Galina Saturnina, Grandmaster of Avant-Garde. Looks like a picture of Mikhail Tal on the cover. That's a beautiful pictures there. The Pawn Study Composer's Manual. I'd love to have that book, actually. I love compose studies and stuff like that. So anyway, yeah, if you want to read about some of the personality from the 1970s, Bobby Fischer, as soon as you read this book, all you're thinking about is, I want to read more about these people. I want to read more about Karpov. I want to read more about Fischer. I want to read more about Korchnoi. I love that era. I grew up with that era, reading about that era. I mean, Fischer talks about the Suez Interzonal in 1967. What an utter tragedy that Fischer did not finish that tournament. What an utter tragedy that he retired effectively from competition, where he came back in 1992 briefly. In 1972. That's a fascinating period of chess history. You know, why would someone retire? When I grew up, Fischer was a mythological figure. You know, had nobody else in chess anything like that. He was just a fascinating figure. I was fascinated by this idea that this guy would just retire in the middle of his career. And in a way, one person's misfortune is another person's fortune, because without Fischer retiring, possibly Korchnoi would not have played these World Championship matches. And I think playing these World Championship matches got his chess to another level. Because around about 1960s, he was probably overshadowed by some of these people, and that really got his chess to another level. So Fischer retiring, can you imagine if Fischer had carried on and you'd have had these matches between Fischer versus Karpov, Fischer versus Kasparov, and you've also got like a prime Korchnoi. It really came to his prime in like the late 1970s, mid 1970s. Had that match with Karpov, really came to his absolute. So I'm coming to a similar period in my career. I'm like 49 in a few days. May the 4th be with you. So I've got inspired. I've got to get inspired. You know, Vasily Ivanchuk. People were raving about Ivanchuk the other day. Korchnoi was the original gangster. He was doing great stuff in his late 40s, early 50s. In a way, he was like effectively the first senior player. everyone goes on about seniors chess now. It's not everyone's cup of tea. I'm not really a fan. But Korchnoi, in a way, was the first seniors player. But he wouldn't have played seniors chess because he would have thought, I can still compete with the younger crowd. So anyway, I'm going to leave the link down below. Please leave the comments down below. Do you agree with me that this is probably the most fascinating period in chess history? Of that period, I should say, the 1970s, because they had more interesting personalities. Everything wasn't destroyed by computers in the sense that we're all going to freestyle chess, right? Because it's all destroyed by computers. It was more fascinating. Anyway, those are my comments. Please leave your comments down below, like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. Thank you.